Real people, real stories, and real challenges that break the status quo. I'm your host, Živile, and welcome to Perception Paradox. Welcome back to Perception Paradox, where we explore the stories that challenge the status quo and reshape our perspectives. In a world driven by specialization, we're about to journey into a life rich in varied experiences, vibrant adventures, and unexpected turns. So, ladies and gentlemen, today our guest is Alex Berger, a beacon of generalism. Alex and I first crossed paths in 2015, if I'm correct, at a shared workplace, and originally from the US, and now calling Denmark his home. He masterfully juggles a traditional job, his entrepreneurship adventures, and a bunch of hobbies. And when I say a bunch, like literally. And there is one thing I can always count on. It's like being always captivated by his travel tales and fresh insights on life. And yeah, so hi, Alex. Welcome to Perception Paradox.
Hi. Oh, it's so fun to sit down and continue our conversations here and kind of bring them to this medium. So thank you so much for inviting me on.
I'm really happy to have you here. Finally, it's happening. So, how are you today?
It's good. It's good. It's definitely juggling a whole bunch of different projects simultaneously, and which is good. I need a nap or two somewhere in the mix, but I think for the most part, yeah, enough projects to keep me busy for a little bit anyway.
Okay, that sounds good. Maybe we're gonna dive in them later today. So, but let's start a bit from the beginning, because you are yourself consider yourself being a generalist, right? You are a
Yes,
generalist,
absolutely.
and we're living in the world that kind of is praising more the specialist. Yet, your journey showcases the beauty and strength of being a generalist and embracing really diverse interests and pursuits, from photography to entrepreneurship to dance to travel, podcasting. I don't know, I can continue naming, but maybe you can share with us what sparked this incredible journey of exploration and personal growth in your case.
Yeah, I would say I'm definitely a proud and unapologetic generalist, which it took me a long time to kind of get to that point, as I think a lot of people with a humanities background or generalist background tend to kind of run into. For me, I think one of the really telling ones was I was visiting my folks and found a first grade piece of feedback from the teacher, and the teacher was like, "Alex is very attentive and very focused when he finds something interesting, and doesn't engage well when he's not." And I think I've kind of carried that through, and it's been this constant struggle to balance the need to kind of conform with completing things and getting things done and focusing on the execution side of it, with chasing down and just being fascinated by a full range of curiosity, and kind of which takes me in all these different directions. But really, I think the catalyst for me, on top of, I guess, maybe that predisposition, was I had a very unusual childhood in that my folks were very experienced travelers and educators. And they took my brother and I out of school when I was 11, and he was 2.5 years younger. Took some backpacks, rented out the house, used that money to backpack through Europe in the mid 90s for 11 months as a family. And so we just wandered around, and they were very intentional at that time as well, even though we were little kids, and asked us, even when we were planning the trip, how do you want to be involved? How do you want to shape this? What do you want to go and see? And then that had us engaged. And so, it was kind of like fun, silly stuff where for me, it was like, oh, Roman Empire and grandpa because of Normandy and Greek stuff. And my brother was like, tractors and building stuff in the Eiffel Tower. And so we shaped the trip kind of partially around that. And we spent that year traveling as a family, and then returned back to the US, spent a year in a school. My parents looked at it and they said, that's not really kind of doing the job. Pulled us back out, rented the house again. We had an old 32-foot fifth wheel trailer, straight out of a movie, with the border collie in the back of the pickup truck,
No way.
and RV'd around the US for a year. And I think out of that, a couple things came. One was just seeing all these different peoples and faiths and history and ways of doing things and foods and everything else. Just so much more kind of breadth to different ways of doing
Mm-hmm.
things, right? And and the other part was I just spent those 2 years talking to my folks and talking to my brother, and then adults. And so I came back and, I was this annoying little 11-year-old or 12-year-old, I guess, at that point in time. And I wanted to talk about politics and the rise and fall of the Roman Empire and weird archaeology and geopolitics, whatever it was. And so that took a little while to adjust, but it's carried all the way through. And so to this day, it's kind of fueled this view of generalism, but that within the umbrella of generalism, that generalism is really a form of specialization. It's just a broader specialization.
Mhm.
And that to be a really effective generalist is to build out a lot of different pillars to then effectively be able to draw relationships and connections between all those different pillars in a very different way. And so it's like basically going from dots to lines to color to a full piece of art. And that's a generalist versus purely focusing on just the dots or just the line or just the dots around the tree
Mhm.
or that side of it. And yeah, I guess that's where I've ended up and why I consider myself a very proud, unapologetic generalist.
Amazing. I love this kind of title. Maybe it can be actually a title for a podcast. Proud
Mm.
and apologetic generalist. Amazing. Love it. But going back then a bit into your childhood, so how did you feel when you got back after those two adventures back to school and formal education? Did you fit in? Because your mind looks like it really shifted miles away from what the general education system actually does feed our children.
Yeah, it was definitely a challenge because I was out of sync in a lot of ways with with the other kids. At that point in time, I came back and not that out of sync, right? Like anybody that was super nerdy or super geeky or like, kind of into that side of things as a kid, I think probably carried a lot of that anyway, because most people don't feel like they fit in that well, right? Like
Mhm.
it is this kind of schism. But it was difficult to get to the point where I felt like I kind of understood the other students. And then I had to work through a period of partial disinterest, partial arrogance, and partial insecurity, right? Because everybody else was talking about like the first kiss and they were talking about like their new pair of shoes and what brand it was and what music they were listening to. And then, I was there still fascinated and just like this overflowing glass full of all these experiences that I wanted to talk about and share. And I think a lot of people have probably had that experience where you come back from a trip and it was this amazing trip. And then, like friends ask, okay, how was the trip? And you give them a 2-minute answer and you start to see their eyes kind of glaze over at like the minute and a half mark. And you're like, oh, but
Yeah,
there's so much more to share, right? But I
totally.
also kind of realized from that a lot of that arrogance was actually just discomfort, right? Kind of
Mm.
protecting myself a little bit from like, oh, like I don't care about the clothes or the haircut or like all that stuff. And it was partial lack of interest in it, but it was also partially just not knowing what the rules were and kind of not, I was out of sync, right? So it didn't create any academic issues. And, I was engaged and could connect with my teachers and that side of it. But the social side of it, I'm kind of learning that. But I guess that's probably why I went on to study and do my degree in human communication and
Mm.
cognition and communication later. So,
Interesting connection. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. And were you always comfortable actually in the skin of being a generalist?
No, not at all. And I still slip in and out of it a little bit, although now I've completely reframed it. I think growing up, I'm American from the American Southwest. I think there's so much narrative around being a specialist, and that journalists or people studying the humanities are basically making financially irresponsible choices that aren't contributing anything, that aren't completers, that aren't really doers. They're just kind of, like the kids sitting in the field sniffing a flower and staring off into the sky and not delivering anything, right? And like, oh, like why would you spend money on a college degree in the humanities? Or, oh, you're going to study basket weaving? Or, oh, all of these different myths. And it's especially bad, I think, in the US because of how expensive our education system has become.
Mm.
And so there's a schism where instead of talking about like, what are you going to learn in the university? What are you going to learn during the different stages of your education? And then how can that be applied and inform all these other areas? It's like, okay, does the math add up? If you've taken on $50,000 or $100,000 or friends that went on to do a PhD and had $300,000 in debt, through that university experience, how are you going to justify that? What job are you going to get that's going to give you enough experience? And we're in a society that, especially over the last 30, 40, 50 years, has been very STEM focused.
Oh
And
yeah.
so with that focus on STEM, it's where a lot of the money is. It's where a lot of the kind of apparent emergent need is. But it's also kind of a lot of prolific laziness, I think, as well, because there's this direct line from, if you're going to become an orthopedic surgeon, you're going to study orthopedic surgery in university. If you're going to go on to be an entrepreneur or to do all the different things that humanities or generalists, not that there aren't generalists on both sides of the sciences and humanities, right? But if you don't have that direct dotted line, it's much harder to track. So we have all these deeply influential generalists that we really, really respect, even going back through history, your Benjamin Franklins and whatnot, who are differentiated by their generalism and their perspective, right? Good entrepreneurs are usually kind of a fusion of generalist and specialist, right? Because they have to understand the market and how to stitch two different things together that are so different. And that's a generalist trait. That's not a specialist trait, right? Like
Yeah.
you're looking outside the silos and you're bringing them together. So yeah, definitely was not super comfortable with it. I felt a lot of imposter syndrome out of it. I felt like I was constantly like I should be focusing more, I should be specializing
Mm-hmm.
more, that I wasn't living up to my full potential, that I must be lazy because I wasn't doing that deep dive all the way down, that maybe my attention span, my focus was bad, that maybe I just wasn't that competent, and that I was interested in all these different things because of that lack of competence. And I was going back to being a kid and overcompensating for the insecurity by just saying, oh no, I'm not interested in that, right? So yeah, it was deeply uncomfortable for a long time, and it led me to write the book and to reflect and to introspect a lot, which has kind of led me to where I'm at today, I guess.
Okay. Oh, thank you for sharing. And would you say that the changing point when you kind of change your narrative with yourself being a generalist fitting in was when you wrote your book, or was it some other pivotal moments in your life that actually kind of made you in peace with who you are and just allowed you, instead of trying to fit in, actually fully embracing your strength and who you are?
Yeah, it's probably a mixture. I'd say half of it was the power of solo travel, and then half of it was really just kind of white knuckling my way through certain things and then just committing to it and delivering it. So once I had kind of proven to myself, okay, I can get a perfect score on my master's degree or on
Mm-hmm.
my thesis for my master's. Oh, okay, I completed that. Oh, I got into the master's. I didn't even think I was going to get in. I had all these imposter syndrome narratives about like, oh, they're not going to
Mm.
accept me. And then I got there and then, oh, they're going to kick me out. And they'll realize that I'm not good enough within 6 months. And then like that progresses, right? Or getting into the workforce and having different roles and this kind of constant focus on the next completing the next task and really delivering on kind of whatever the next challenge is without really being good about kind of stepping back and saying like, look at all the different things you've done. So a prime example that I always kind of link back to was photography. Travel photography has been a huge hobby and passion for me. And at different states, I'm always in this kind of hockey stick. I forget what the name of the theory is, right? But where you hockey stick up and you feel
Mm-hmm.
super competent, and then you collapse down, and then you feel completely
Oh
like a
yeah.
novice, and then you're back up, right? And National Geographic being a deep inspiration from when I was a kid, I won Pictures of the Year contest. Not one. I was one of the top 10 finalists in the Global Pictures of the Year for National Geographic for one of my photos. And here's this like high watermark or almost high watermark. I guess,
Oh yeah,
winning
it's
would be
insane.
good, right? But
Congratulations again. I mean, like, it's a big
yeah,
achievement.
yeah, thank you. Like being like, I mean, just, like that's that little kid. And you think back to that little kid and how tickled like that little kid would be, right?
Yeah.
If you went back. And so like this amazing moment of fulfillment. And then 5, 6 days later, I'm sitting there and I'm editing my photos. And that just added pressure to the feeling that, oh, am I really a good photographer? Or was that just a one-off? And like, oh, I really need to like double down and all these photos aren't
Oh
good
yeah.
enough. And, like right back in it and then like kind of slapping myself out of it and being like, no, like look at what happened, be honest, be fair with yourself, turn the lens a little bit, reflect on it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a very long way of answering your question, that
Yeah.
what I had to do was gain enough self-confidence and internalize that self-confidence and experience through travel and whatnot, where I developed my own self-confidence and then simultaneously basically go out and achieve enough that I proved to myself that I could do a lot of that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and then I could make the decision. And it's very similar to if you go and do a lot of stuff on your own, if you don't have somebody to go and do that with at a party or to eat at a restaurant or something like that, you feel really insecure or like a loser going out and doing that by yourself. That, oh, there's nobody, I don't have any friends, I don't have any options. That's why I have to go do this by myself.
Mm-hmm.
Versus once you're feeling really comfortable in yourself and you feel empowered in it, then it's, I can't be bothered to do all this other stuff. I want to eat this food at this point in time in this location. And I'm super happy if somebody else wants to join, but I'm going to go over there and I'm going to do it and I'm going to eat there.
Yeah,
And that pivot, you're still eating by yourself in a restaurant, right? Nothing else has changed whatsoever. But like internalization of that has just been such a meteoric change for me. And then realizing that I do that all the time, right? On that like weird framing, that
that's so
confusion.
interesting. Thank you so much for sharing so insightfully how it was all evolving. Before we go to talk a bit about your book, which I'm very curious to dive into, I wanted also to ask now a question about your blogging time. You were traveling a lot solo, right? And you kind of mentioned that sometimes you would be like maybe misheard by the people. How did that solo travel blog was born in the first place? Was it something that for you to be a platform to be heard and to share the adventures and to document, or was it just, oh, why not? I'm gonna try. It's a new trend.
It was effective laziness. I
Ah,
Yes, very much so. I graduated from the bachelor's 2007.
uh-huh.
Then I took a 3 month, yeah,
Okay.
3 months, not 3 years. Yes, definitely 3 month solo trip, and yeah, was absolutely terrified by doing it. And I landed a job in a mid-market mergers and acquisitions group as a researcher and analyst for when I returned after that. And I didn't know about M&A, but I thought it looked interesting. And I was sitting there and I was like, I'm going to go do this solo trip. Like, what am I going to do? I need to blog, or I need to journal, and I need to share emails with parents and friends and all these people as I go on this
Mm.
great adventure and something for myself. But I'm not a journaler or any of these things. So I was like, you know what? If I create a blog, I'll have to maybe, I don't know, maybe I'll censor it a little bit, or it'll be a little bit more, not, it'll be for everybody. But I'm going to just create a blog post and I'm going to just chronicle the stories in a mixture of kind of Rick Steves and various other adventure writers, right? And go
Amazing.
over and I'll just put it all up on the blog. And then I loved it and I kept writing and writing and grew it. And eventually I did that through the remainder of my 3.5 years at the M&A firm. And then decided, you know what, I want to relocate out of Arizona and maybe I want to go full time with this travel blogging thing because I was starting to get some traction. And
Famous. Oh, yay.
yeah, like there was some cool engagement. Blogging was becoming a big thing. I guess the precursor to some of the influencer travel blogging stuff.
Huh?
And at that point, I was like, oh, wouldn't this be amazing, right? I get into this master's. It gives me a 2-year visa to Europe. I can study, and then, but the study, they're interesting. Maybe they're difficult and stimulating, but really, it gives me 2 years to wander around and travel and write about it and launch my blog and use that as an entrepreneurial kind of platform. And then I'll either graduate and take the most high paying classic business job that gets offered to me somewhere in the world, or I'll go full time with my travel blog. And this is about 2011, travel the world nonstop as a solo traveler, running a travel blog, and made it up into the top 100 travel blogs, independent travel blogs at that point in time. Started
In
to
the US
actually
or
move from
globally?
globally, but let's say English language. So, and then started to work with a lot of DMO, like destination marketing organizations, getting paid. Moved from
Amazing.
free stuff to getting paid. Yeah, which was all going quite well. And opened up some amazing doors. Then I kind of looked at it, and I looked at the experience some travel blogging friends were having. I was like, hold up, like this is not the lifestyle and adventure and everything else that it seems, right? Like it's actually launching a full-time magazine, digital magazine in the travel space, which there's so little money to and is super difficult to actually track conversions.
Hmm.
And I'm going to do that while traveling solo, while risking burnout, while doing all these different things, while having to do my own business outreach and my own sales and all of these different elements. And then I need to be traveling around all the time, which would mean that I'd have to leave Denmark, which I'd fallen in love with at that point in time because I was
Okay.
just finishing the master's. And I realized that like even a free trip that was fully comped was actually costing me money if I did so much as bought one soda. So I could have an amazing trip and an amazing hotel, an amazing restaurant, and all that stuff. But yeah, if I bought one soda on that trip, I was actually in debt and I was losing money on that trip. And so all those things started to click together for
Hmm.
me. And I realized that it would be great for a year, it would be great for a couple of years, but it didn't suit my personality to be fully vagabonding, if you will, indefinitely or even for 10 years or that side of it. So that was when I kind of looked at it and I was like, okay, I'll return back into kind of the corporate, if you will, or classic
Okay.
business sense. And that's where we met.
Yeah, that's so true. All right. So, but you moved to Denmark quite some years ago, right? Was it 10, 11 years ago? No?
Yeah, over 11 years. Yeah.
How was it? How was the beginning for you, especially reallocating from such a different environment culturally, and work environment is very different. In US, it's all about the hustling and like number one sales. The Nordics are known more about its balance and work life kind of harmony.
Yeah, it was, I mean, having the master's as kind of the gateway definitely helped, but also everything about the education system was totally different. Like the synchronization, the timing, the exams. I studied in English, which helped in an international program, but I was fascinated by Danish culture. And, that's that little kid that was traveling around Europe with my folks.
Hmm.
And why do people speak differently? What's the pacing? What's the timing? How do we interact? How do we communicate? Like, okay, where's the word please, right? So we got thank you, but where's please in Danish, right? Like, not really there, right?
No, not
So
really.
what's the impact there? What's the difference when you have a language that has, I think, about 450,000 words in Danish versus 2.2 million in English?
Hmm.
And English is kind of this imperial language that was spread all over the world and at a period, and it's kind of a newer language. So it stole words, different words for snow and all these other things, right, from all these other places, versus a highly contextual language like Danish, right, where if you've got 450,000 words instead of 2.2 million, the way that you form those together and everything else is going to change the ear and how you listen and how you like make sense of things. So all these different little quirks were fascinating to me. And I kind of came at it from the standpoint of I embraced my American identity, but became very much third culture
Hmm.
space, if you will, where I'll never become fully Danish. If I go back, I'm now yet again, a super weird American. So I kind of, I sit in between those two, and very early on kind of expected that, right? So it wouldn't be as weird and shocking if I went to China as an American and then there tried to integrate and become Chinese, that I would have, certain cultural elements to overcome. And I applied that same logic to Denmark, even though Denmark maybe felt more familiar and had fewer barriers for me. And I think that's really helped me understand my American cultural side, my traveler cultural side, and I'm just fascinated by like Danish culture and that side as well.
Did you find it difficult or easy to integrate yourself into the job market, into environment? Because Denmark, well, myself, I've been living there for what, 6 years, right?
Mm,
Quite a long time now. They can, on the first note, they're quite closed for entering people into their lives.
mm.
How was it for you?
I got my teeth absolutely knocked in. Uh,
Really?
it took me over a year and a half, despite the
Yeah.
work experience I had, despite having good mentors, despite having good grades. Been on a team that had won the communication case competition for, with one of the biggest Danish brands, and all of these things that on paper should have opened the door, but made it actually more difficult because we were out of sync. They didn't necessarily know what to make of my resume, and I basically talked myself out of jobs because I'd come in and
Mm.
I'd interview like an American, and the Danes were very interested in hearing kind of a much more kind of Danish approach where, tell me how you're going to do this job and how you're going to do it well. And as an American, it's like, of course, like do that job. Like that's why you brought me in. Here's everything else you get, right? Like there's more and there's more and you get this and there's this and look at what I'm doing over here. And also as a generalist, right? Like that's that other element where I had all these elements and they're like,
Yeah.
yeah, you're going to get bored and no, go away. We're not going to hire you. So over that year and a half, basically I had over 120 different serious job applications that I submitted. I think I went and interviewed 20 plus times through the interview process, four final rounds, and before I finally landed in a product marketing role.
And we became the colleagues. High five.
Exactly. It worked out beautifully. So yeah, but a lot of that was also on me because I didn't understand and pick up on the rules. right?
Hmm.
Like that it was a different rule book to have that Danish conversation and interview with the Danes or in the Danish workplace. And in retrospect, I can see very clearly a lot of the mistakes that I was making.
I can relate to that. I remember having with you a conversation 6 years ago when I just moved to Denmark and my official job offer fell apart. And I'm like, I just want to do my master's. I don't want to work full time. I want to do part time. But I've been working already for quite some years. And my profile was like, you're not a regular student and you kind of come full time or just don't come. And I
Hmm.
remember, I think we were having Glock. It was kind of fall cold, and you were like, "No, no, it's all right. Welcome to Denmark. You will experience rejections." And it was the first time in my life when I was bouncing the wall. They would invite me to interviews. Everyone were surprised, but there would be always someone else with less experience or like I don't know someone's cousin, whatever.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to my mom, and she was like, just be more simple. And I'm like, Mom, I just want to be myself. I
Hmm.
don't want to pretend to be someone else. So it was quite a journey, actually, but really helped that you shared your experience. But well, that's how it is sometimes in some other countries. Change your perspective and continue trying. That's it.
And good humility, even though it
Yeah.
properly beat me up. Still a
Yeah.
few, yeah, scars from that one, I think, but they've been useful.
I don't know. I think I rechanneled my energy actually, and like I'm
Mm,
like, okay, just be more simple, and then
mm.
actually it helped me to change my trajectory in my career, which was very, very helpful. All right, so we kind of got to this kind of your integration to Denmark. So I'm very curious to learn more about your practical curiosity book because you wrote it already while working in Denmark, being quite established, and how did that come to your mind to write it?
Yeah, with the blogging over a number of years, I had this experience writing, and I'd really kind of started to hone and kind of harden my skin to posting publicly, right? Opinions and ideas and kind of exposing elements of myself and that reflective side of it. And received a lot of encouragement to publish a book, but everybody was talking about a travel book or a book about Danish culture and integration or all of these different perspectives on it. And every year I started writing a birthday reflective post where basically what I would do is I would reflect on kind of life, love, and travel, different aspects of life, and then would really reflect on what I'd learned, what I was passionate about, what I was curious about. And I'd done that for a few years, and friends kept coming back to me and saying like, hey, this has this really meaningful chunk in your 9,000 word ramble this year, right? Yeah, maybe there's a little gem here, a little gem there. But I also reflected on that I typically work in 6 to 8 months sprints of passion for a project.
Mhm.
And then that initial passion for that project or that like drive to really like, oh my God, I'm going to work on this. I'm going to build it. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to research it. I'm going to make it happen. Like tapers off a little bit, and then I either have to recharge a little bit before I re-energize,
Mhm.
or I put it into like a maintenance mode, and then it's just kind of maintaining it. And there's a few exceptions. I've been dancing for almost 20 years, the blogging, that side of it, that has been kind of outside of that. But so I knew that I needed to write the book when I sat down to write the book fast-ish, right? Like
Okay.
it wouldn't be a 5 year project or an 8 year project or something like that. And so I started listening to different podcasts and just picking and choosing elements where they would talk about sitting down and writing a bunch of pages over a long weekend, doing a brain dump, or different ways to structure the book and to create it. And so because it was my first book and because I knew I had all these topics that I was super passionate about that were kind of all over the place. They were generalist topics, right?
Of course.
But that had this opportunity to really engage and interest me and to share the conversations and the reflections that I was having on a day-to-day basis with friends and that side of it. There had to be some way, or it excited me to maybe turn that into something and turn that into the book. So I went
Mm.
completely different than a pure travel book. And there's a travel section. I started with the foundation of those birthday posts, which gave me maybe 30% of the book. And I decided I was going to create the book in chapters, but more like a bathroom reader, uh, as my generalist solution, where curiosity was the common thread throughout it. but I didn't want to have this long narrative of Alex's journey through life, or here's the feather, and the feather keeps popping up in all these different settings and these stories. Because I also wanted to write it in very different tones, right? If it was a thought exercise, I wanted it to be kind of maybe more reflective and
Mm,
academic. If it was an observation or a personal experience, I wanted to be able to write it more first person, and and or like descriptive or observational. So it's this like semi-chaotic mixture, right, throughout it, but that let me write it within 6 months and was able to pull the ideas together. And I'd sit down and I'd made a list of all these different topics that I was reflecting on and passionate about, and then or musing on. And then in the evening, after a full day at work where my brain was a little bit sapped, I'd take a nap and I'd sit down and I'd find whichever one I was the most excited about. And I'd basically fall into that topic and then write 2,000, 2,000
mhm.
words or whatever it would be on one or two of those or three of those topics. And it felt so much more organic that way. And there was no pressure. This has to fit this formula, right? It was just kind of
Amazing.
flow into it and then pulled it together. It's 4 abstract thought exercises at the beginning, reflections on life, success, business, hybrid at the beginning, a section on relationships, and then a section on travel and what I've learned from travel. And that became practical curiosity.
That's pretty cool. I really like the part that you actually, with the thought exercises, and that you actually encourage everyone to not only think through your own perspective, but imagine that, I don't know, your friend or your partner or your family is also how they would behave in that situation. That actually, it's really interesting because usually we tend to focus on ourselves rather than the environment. So I really enjoyed that one. How did you come up with this idea actually to involve more brain interactive book, if I could say that?
I really like how it turned out. I think in retrospect, it's probably a really rough way to start a book. Because you hear, I've taken this like bathroom reader, like every section, I was like, I'm going to make it, like I'm going to make each section like 4 pages max, right? Like this isn't a deep dive. I'm not going to explain
Yeah.
social capital or a theory or whatever it is. And then you start and you have these 4 thought exercises that are just like, wow, right? But I think it was also very much that I was like, these are things that are fundamental tools that I have learned from my folks or from travel or observation or listening to podcasts that I apply as these mental frameworks over and over and over throughout
Mm.
this book. So it's kind of like, okay, let's all agree on these foundational ideas or thoughts. And then from here, all right, then we dive into the rest, and then you can flip around to whatever. And so yeah, it's really nice to hear that it that it worked and it
Yeah.
was effective in doing just what I hoped with it, even though it is a little bit of a heavy start sometimes.
Well, it always can be. So talking about heavy starts and starting new things, it's pretty inspiring what you're saying that you had those 6 to 8 month sprints, right? You choose, if I understood you correctly, you choose some kind of passion project or something you want
Hmm.
to do, and you just focus on that, right?
Yeah, it's where I'll get, it's kind of like the dog with a bone, right? Like I found it, I've got it, I'm really excited
Yeah.
about it. I'm gonna like run around with it and chase it down. And then after a while, I feel like, okay, I've learned a lot about it. I've gotten to that 80% maybe point where I'm
Okay.
kind of like, okay, I've got a good understanding of it. I get where this fits into everything. I've kind of investigated a lot of the different offshoots of it. Now, do I really want to take it that remaining 20%, right, to really polish it and finesse it? Or was that interesting enough, right?
Mm.
Do I take that and do I apply it to something else? And from a creation standpoint, right? I mean, I think a lot of entrepreneurs also struggle with that, right? They get into the project and then the new cool idea comes along and you're like, oh, I just want to go work on this other cool idea. Like, but maybe we can, I've got to like at least finish this or be ready to commit to it.
Or when you get into a project and then you out of a sudden start noticing other people doing some similar projects that maybe they are way ahead of you, and you're like, oh my God, maybe I'm too late. Should I really do that or not?